just met the great writer Iain Sinclair at Liverpool Street Station, and we are walking through the city, just across London Wall. I've not really idea where we're going today. It's a bit of a magical mystery tour, but if you want anyone to give you a magical mystery tour through London, it's Iain Sinclair, right? Wonder where we'll end up today. Down here, Ian? We're going down here because it's leading us towards a little church that I want to show you.
Yeah. And then what about?
Also because I love this wall, this pregnant wall. You actually can put your hand on it, avoiding the chewing gum, and you take the temperature of another era of London. The beginnings of modernism coming out of this completely medieval city. And this is a site that crosses, for me, in 1876, when, because of the huge engine of capital that the City of London had become, reaching out its tentacles into the whole world, the two most visionary characters of proto-modernism, Vincent van Gogh and Rimbaud, Arthur Rimbaud, are both in London at the same time, unknown to each other, and both making a series of exploratory dérives. Rimbaud more at the visionary end of his career, and the walks are much more drug-induced and labyrinthine, whereas Van Gogh has not found himself. He's only sketching, he's never painted in colour, and he's still trying to be a man of business. And he comes right here, to Austin Friars Church. Not this church, because the old Austin Friars Church disappeared. But this church here was auctioning off a print of the drawing that Van Gogh made of Austin Friars Church with his own script underneath it. One of the few drawings that he did in London. Most of the drawings are little black and white sketches attached to letters. And he came here all the way from West London, out near London Airport, where he was staying, working in a school, to the city for several reasons, one of which was he was collecting money due to the school, and he would have to go around the city. And while he was doing that, he found this was the Dutch church, and he came here and made a drawing. So I think this is a good spot to start. And it overlaps with my other projects. If you look on the church, there's a figure of a Dutchman of the 17th century, but his head is completely surrounded by a halo of arrows, as if he's gone off as a Dutch trader into the world and been martyred by indigenous people, which connects up with my own family history that we're going to follow as well. So much of this, but the link here for me is coffee, which is now this roasted bakers, artisan, tastemakers coffee stuff that lands here, because the book I'm doing about my great-grandfather, who went off to Peru to work for the Peruvian Corporation of London, who'd been given an immense tranche of land at the time that the government of Peru was bankrupt after the War of the Pacific with Chile, and they couldn't pay their bonds on the railways they were making, so they just said to the Peruvian corporation, who were based in London, you can have all this land in exchange for our debt, and we'll let you run the railways and everything else, the mining, for 60 years. And my great-grandfather and another man called Alexander Ross, who'd both been planters, were chosen to take this trip into totally unexplored Upper Amazon territory to see what could grow there. And so they went off on this year-long expedition and decided you could grow coffee, which is what they'd been growing in Peru, in Ceylon. They'd been coffee planters in Ceylon, both of them. And Arthur, my great-grandfather, had made a fortune by the time he was 40, having grown up very poor on a Scottish farm and basically been thrown off his land and ended up going to Ceylon, as was Sri Lanka. Retired at 40, all going well, and then the the coffee harvest was obliterated by bugs and fungus, totally wiped out. And it had been like tulips. There was a huge boom in coffee. The city was investing in coffee. Money for coffee was rolling in. So this current vogue for coffee sits very well with what the story is. And we'll kind of fill that into where we're going to walk now. And it was very interesting that Van Gogh arrived in the heart of coffee land when he was wrestling with his own demons and deciding what he should do to eventually to become a spiritual seeker and a walker and a painter. Always a walker, completely mad walker.
Are we near London's first coffee house here?
We are. We're going to pass it. We're actually going to pass London's first coffee house, which I had noticed, but I couldn't remember where it was. You know? And then in the course of doing this walk the other day, there is London's first coffee house. Because the thing with this city and the money and the expansion is everything interconnects. Coffee, money, coffee, real estate, foreign countries, just as engines of capital, you know, all of that sits here. The City of London is by far and away the most coded enclosure. Once you start to look at the buildings, there's so much manifestation of different Masonic ideologies and magics that around the occulted notion of money. You know, you look at any building, it's just absolutely stiff with it. Symbols.
Kind of difficult to keep up with the route that we're taking. We've just gone through the Royal Exchange and now we're going over Cornhill, and Ian's the perfect person to ask about my idle speculation that Cornhill is one of the hills of the City of London. Hillocks. Hillocks of the city. And wasn't it also one of the potential sites for a pre-Roman settlement? I don't know.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, well, obviously, just geographically, because of what the Thames was, any slight hill or mound around would have been a centre for original settlement. And then once the Romans come in, I mean, Leadenhall Market becomes the forum, and this is the origins of settlement, really, as far as London is concerned.
So Gracechurch Street is where the gallery that Van Gogh used to visit in the city was located somewhere. We're not entirely sure where it is in Gracechurch Street.
There's not much trace of it now. There's a family of framers who also ran galleries selling largely prints and topographical. And so Van Gogh obviously could have very easily come here from where we were in Friars. Very, very nice, easy walk. Forgetting that you're somewhere with a camera. And this building here was the headquarters of the Peruvian Corporation of London. And up at the top, now you see this sort of pyramid structure rearing above it, but it would have been quite an impressive building in its day, with again a series of Egyptian Masonic temple buildings at the top, and one of those offices was where my great-grandfather Arthur, this Scottish planter, turned up. He was quite an elderly guy in his 60s, as was thought then, and was given this contract, £100 a month, to go into unexplored territory in the upper Amazon and make a report. And I've been to the building in Brussels where Joseph Conrad got his contract to become a boat captain on the Congo River, with disastrous consequences mentally and physically for him, but with a great piece of writing. So Arthur's piece of writing wasn't quite in that category, but it was a book that defined his life and has led to me trying to go back to understand my own life through what he did and the kind of writing he did in a book published in 1895. This is called Plantation House because of the coffee plantations. And this is where the big coffee auctions and tea auctions took place, actually going through onto Mincing Lane, which we're going to go onto around the corner. So all of the estates in the colonies used to send back samples of their coffee, and the traders would come down here and sniff at them, test them, and buy them as futures. This is kind of a future investment. Boom, boom, boom financially. And the only trace of it now is just in the name, Plantation House.
I'm sure people must walk past it all the time and not really consider.
Plantation, do you want to celebrate that? I mean, these are essentially eco-slave plantations. And the most horrifying aspect of all is that Kew Gardens were right at the back of all of this nefarious dealing. They paid people to go into the rubber planting areas and steal plants, because it wasn't a British colony, steal as much as they could, ship them back to Kew, propagate them in Kew, and then send them to Ceylon or Malaya and essentially destroy the native rubber industry. And they successfully did it, and they were funded by the British Secret Service at the time. They were a branch of the British Secret Service. So Kew Gardens, for all its present eco-piety, was an absolute bio-pirate of the late Victorian period.
Actually, I might wipe my lens. I might actually take some of the rain off my...
Oh, of course, the rain, yes, that's good, isn't it?
What were you saying about Booth?
I was saying, because I got asked to do an introduction to Charles, a lovely new edition from Thames Hudson of Charles Booth's poverty maps, which are an amazing thing. And the starting point for a lot of Booth's walks were in Toynbee Hall, which overlaps with Stephen Watts and Sebald again. But while Booth was exploring the dark poverty side of London and making these street-by-street maps with a series of people sent out on epic walks, on the other side of his life he was a ship owner from Liverpool. The Booth shipping line initiated the first traffic to the Amazon. You could go right up to the Amazon, to Manaus and Iquitos on a Booth ship, and Booth sailed off himself to do it. And so his ships were very much implicated in the trade of colonial exploitation, biopiracy, rubber, all of that. The traders in that were using this fleet at the same time as he's describing London as a kind of jungle of darkness, heart of darkness. All of the things here are a metaphor for what's happening in capital with the other side of his life, which gives him the money to be able to patronize poverty studies in London. It's not for nothing that the founding myth and symbol of the city is Mithras, the double-headed, light and dark. Everything that you touch in the city of London is schizophrenic. The frontage and then the seething underbelly, and the two things coexist, and they have done from the start.
The wealth and the scale of Iain's knowledge is quite incredible, isn't it? And all these connections, the way that everything seems to link together.
The one thing left to colonize is the past. And when you've achieved everything, you just throw down your own heritage version of history onto the floor like a load of golden turds.
Looking down there towards the Tower of London.
It's just a bombed ruin, shell. Again, this little bit here has got this keelery feel to it. It's a bit like the stuff he shoots around St Paul's.
It's being constructed.
But basically, the coffee and all of these products of empire are coming into the private docks here and then up to Mincing Lane for the auctions, and the price is going up and up and up and up until nature decides to have a laugh and wipes the whole harvest out, destroys them completely. Thereafter they start to grow tea in Ceylon rather than coffee, and the coffee moves out to Peru with horrendous consequences for the indigenous people.
This is one of the prehistoric mounds of London, right?
Yeah, what is this place? I've never
No,
saw
never
some
heard
kind
of
of big shack. Is it a hotel? I haven't haven't come across here before.
You could probably actually pronounce the correct Welsh name. Is it the Bryn Gwyn?
But the actual Tower Hill, rather than
The mound.
is the sacred mound with a head of Bran the Blessed,
Yeah.
which is why London is really a Welsh city, obviously, because out of the Mabinogion, Bran, this giant, comes to London and his head is chopped off and buried under the White Hill, the White Mound. And while it remains undisturbed, the fate of London is secure. And it's a prophetic head, and it also figures in Elizabeth Gordon's book about London mounds and prehistoric circles, in which there's a triangulation between Parliament Hill, Tot Hill, and the Penton Mound, which is in Islington, and lines of force and energy sweep across London between these significant sites, which was an inspiration for me at the time I was working down the river here in Limehouse and Wapping, cutting the grass and putting together lead heat. And the tower kind of figures in that, I guess.
Here we have some old Thames barges from when it was a working river.
Terribly impacted, labyrinthine sense of the city with all its secrets, and within 12-15 minutes walk you're on the river, and you really sense the business of the world coming in and out of here, and all that other stuff has already dropped away completely.
Exposed by the Thames light.
You look quite like an old sea dock.
I feel like one sometimes.
You look like you've been back from some expedition to the ends of the world and come back ancient mariner to tell the tale.
We came here when we were doing the film of London Overground, and I think
Were we doing sort of bits of readings from the book?
Yeah, I'll dig out. I'll drop in a bit of Ian reading from downriver in this park.
And this is where there were these monkeys were running about in the trees. The marmosets have gone. A graveyard detached from its host, a church tower faking a period grandeur, with its body tumbles wantonly into decay behind the corrugated iron fencing. From the low steps of St John's, Scandrett Street, I mourn the loss of another secret locale, a temenos remaining sacred because we do not need to visit it. It's there, and that's enough. The balance in our psychic map of the city is unharmed. But now another disregarded inscape has been noticed and dragged from cyclical time to pragmatic time and has been asked to justify itself. Shannon landscapes are the chosen agents of reality. Red-bearded, slow-moving giants in check shirts have the renovation contract. The nautical graves are bulldozed, the sepulchres are retained as captive features. The brute undergrowth has been uprooted and the ghosts have been put to the torch. All the totemic animals have fled. Marmosets, lemurs, jennets, tamarins, sugar gliders, brought ashore covertly and traded from the public houses along the highway. And this is the tidied up result of what was happening when I came here in 1987, 1988. This wilderness is now this ghost of a graveyard opposite the restored church.
There was a plaque for the levellers over here, which had been unveiled by Tony Benn, which had been just before he died, I would have thought.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, obviously that wasn't there in the time of downriver, but it's amazing to have the connection with the levellers and Tony Benn. Was that plaque there?
Yeah.
I never knew that. This is really a significant spot. This is Thomas Rainsborough, buried in the churchyard on the 14th of November 1648 after a funeral procession organised by the Leveller movement. Rainsborough was a spokesman for the Levellers and a colonel in the New Model Army, killed by a royalist raiding party during the siege of Pontefract. On the day of the funeral, a Leveller leaflet recorded the inscription on Rainsborough's tomb. It proclaimed Rainsborough had made kings, lords, commoners and judges shake, cities and committees quake. He was, it said, just valiant and true, and it ended with the words that here Rainsborough bids the noble Levellers adieu. Plaque unveiled by Councillor Rania Khan, writer John Rees and politician Tony Benn in 2013. So, we're actually honouring one of the Levellers, and that gives it a spirit that I missed on my early account in downriver. The Levellers and the diggers are very much associated with the river, but further down in Putney, where they had the great debates in Putney with the army commanders as to what was going to happen after they'd won the Civil War. Register the sensation of it, which is, I think, what happens with these walks. You're drawn repeatedly to certain sites, and the sites can reveal themselves bit by bit as having had a significant increment of London history that evolves generation by generation. That's how it works. I get that Stephen Watts thing as you're not understanding totally whether you are performing a role that's already been written in a book, or whether the machinery of the book actually was enacted by you. You don't know whether you're an author, participant, actor, faker, what you are. Your status disappears and you just become detritus of London. Apart from this strange little pub, Turner's Old Star, which was where he hid his mistress, Mrs. Booth, away, and kept a private life quite close to the Thames, which he loved, The same site is associated with Lydia Rogers, who was accused of witchcraft and found guilty of allowing the devil to draw blood from her and to form an evil pact in 1658. So not too long after Rainsborough the Leveller was buried a short way away in an adjacent graveyard.
Almost walking in reverse the walk that we did for London Overground, the film I made of Ian's book of that name. And we walked down one day from Shadwell to Wapping. A slightly different route, but it's interesting to be back down here with Ian. Big new development that I've not seen before, right down here at Tobacco Dock. Very interesting form of psychogeographic derive, where I'm just following something which has been done before in psychogeography terms, but the fact is I'm following one of the great figures of British psychogeography, or psychogeography in general, which adds another layer to this quest. No idea where we're going. Ian's up here somewhere.
This London plane tree here marks the burial spot of the scientist and mystic who spoke to the dead, Emanuel Swedenborg, who lived in Wellclose Square, which was just behind us. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to see Swedenborg's burial spot, is that there's a connection here with where we're going in the Sebald walk to the Jewish burial ground, because Rabbi Lowe, the Kabbalistic rabbi, is buried in that burial ground that you didn't get into, with the Sebald house, the Austerlitz house nearby. And when Swedenborg and Lowe were both living in Wellclose Square, just at the end there, they got to know each other. And Rabbi Lowe apparently was an expert in sex magic, among other things, and they had long conversations, both about the Swedenborgian idea that the dead are with us and converse with us, and Rabbi Lowe's sense of all the Kabbalistic and Golemistic mysteries of London. So these two great figures were very close by. And we're now in the body of what was a church. And when Swedenborg was buried, it was a great fashion for collecting skulls, and the church vergers allowed in some tourist party who cut off the head of Swedenborg and took it away. Subsequently, the head was apparently recovered and reunited with the body, and a Swedish warship was sent to bring the body and the head back to Uppsala in Sweden. But unfortunately they got the wrong head, and the right head eventually emerged in a junk shop in Swansea and was authenticated and tested. And so another head appeared and has now been sent to the right place. And in Swedenborg House there's a cast, I think, of the wrong head in a box there, which I have written about in the past. This chain of heads is quite odd, because we spoke about the head of Bran the Blessed at the White Mound by the Tower of London. So he's there. Swedenborg with his missing head is here. There's a crossroads right behind us on Cable Street, and at that crossroads, the body of the Ratcliffe Highway murderer was buried after he'd been accused but hadn't already been executed. He committed suicide in prison, and as a suicide he was buried at the crossroads. His head was cut off, a stake through his heart, and the head again disappeared, with rumours that it was in the pub there, which was a pub used by sewermen and which I used occasionally to drink in, and they did have a collection of skulls under the bar. And so these prophetic heads of London shadow the river and move all the way down from the Tower to Limehouse, each one accumulating myth as it goes.
Site the famous siege, and their siege house. So we've been drawn to this peculiar ruined tub. Yeah, it's like a house of horrors.
Iain wanted to take me back to the street mentioned in W.G Sebald's celebrated novel Austerlitz, where I'd recently walked with the artist Bob and Roberta Smith, following Iain's instructions.
So we're back in Alderney Road. Iain wants to show me the actual site of the Austerlitz house.
Being a little overconfident to state the actual house, because obviously there is no actual house, but just going on the elements in his text, we can find an actually fictional house that has the atmosphere and description that he touches on. And I felt one of the elements that it has to have is it has to physically overlook the burial ground. There has to be this complete connection. It can't just be one of these here, any random house. So then there's really two choices, and I'll show you. And I think, in a sense, because it doesn't exist, it could be either. You make your own choice of it. I mean, the elements are that in travelling regularly from Norwich to Liverpool Street, Sebald reported that his train frequently stalled and stopped at a particular spot very close to here, and while he was whiling away the time, looked across the train window and saw the walls of what he took to be a Jewish burial ground, and he wanted to come there and investigate it. When he got together with Stephen Watts, who lived in Chigwell and knew the East End very well, or he found it on his own, who knows, but this is it. And obviously this has the atmosphere of the house he describes, but this is probably not it, because this belongs to the burial ground itself and would have been occupied by a caretaker. But it has the mysterious, look at it now against the dark sky, has the quality, but it's the second contender for me to the one on the other side. Please do not feed the foxes. Behind the walls we have the eternal presence of Rabbi Lowe, who connected with Emanuel Swedenborg when they both lived near Wellclose Square and held these long conversations. Swedenborg in his dusty black velvet suit, living on cups of coffee, a gaunt, haunted presence who came ashore in London as a man condemned, because on his first visit he was on a plague ship and he was in quarantine, but he couldn't wait to engage with English scientists, so he came ashore illegitimately and was arrested. And if you broke quarantine at that time, you would be hanged. But because his uncle was a bishop in Sweden, they pulled a few strings and they didn't hang him. And he carried on to have this moment of vision when he was in a chop house in Farringdon and heard a voice saying, "Don't eat too much," which became a curious prophetic sign, and the same presence came to him later that night in his lodgings. And from there on, London was a site of vision and permissions, because there was a liberal publishing policy in London. You could publish books that you couldn't have published in Sweden or be accused of heresy. And if you ever got a person who could communicate with the dead, then this was one of the places to do it. And the whole Sebaldian exercise is a form of communication with the dead. The books have a kind of European comedy, but they're also in a way posthumous. They seem to represent a vanishing culture. And it's really nice that we've been able to walk out of the buzz and heat of the city to this relatively calm spot in which this book, Austerlitz, cooked, and which you've already tracked down in the presence of an artist. My personal take, and it's only my interpretation, is that this is the right house for a lot of reasons. It's got a phenomenal atmosphere, and this room here, it looks right over the graveyard. You go in at that door. The wall here has all kinds of shapes and signs in it. It's a gift for a writer, and I think he'd have fallen for this particular house. This is the one I nominate.
This is the archive here where Iain did a lot of his research for Ludhi, the stuff that Peter Ackroyd then was inspired by, shall we say?
He took an interest, yes, for sure, and carried it away into quite a successful book.
And I suppose you might say it influenced Alan Moore as well, the research that you did there?
It did, because Alan told me that he was given it by Neil Gaiman right back shortly after it was published, because Alan's always a voracious reader, and Neil Gaiman was very interested in these weird mysteries of London, and he picked it up and he gave it to Alan Moore. He said, I think this will be a good one for you, Alan. And indeed Alan drew quite a lot from it, which he used in From Hell, including all kinds of occulted mappings of London.
Well, thank you to Iain behind me here for an amazing walk from the city through to the East End, unravelling mysteries as we go. And now we're going to unravel the mystery of travelling on the Central Line. And I'll see you on the next walk, wherever that may be. Who could have predicted this one?